Good morning and thanks for joining us for the PNAMP Fish Monitoring Work Group CAP DES Juvenile Outmigrant Refinement Defined Smolt Equivalent Task Team meeting. That is a mouthful, guys. A couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. Jen, if you want to advance the slide. Please mute yourself. One more. With the microphone, you can see sometimes if it's not up on your screen, if you just wiggle your mouse, it'll pop up sometimes at the top, sometimes at the bottom. If you're on the phone, use *6. Let's see, if you have questions, this is such a small group. I mean, feel free to unmute yourself. If you're not comfortable talking, you can use the comment. Jen, one more slide. So you can use the chat and just chat your question or your feedback. Also, you can raise your hand and we can just call on you if that's easier. We are recording this meeting and it will be available on our YouTube channel in probably about a week, maybe less, just kind of depending on the holiday. So if you want to now, just open up the chat and this will kind of give you a chance to try this out and introduce yourself with your name and agency. That kind of helps us keep track of who's here. Next slide, Jen. On the agenda for today, welcome and introductions. The next thing will be I'll hand it off to Mike to review the task description that the team leads have come up with for the defined smolt equivalent task. The next item on the agenda, we want to talk about what we learned as a result from the DDT survey. So we can kind of go over that with you guys and lessons. I don't know if it's lessons learned or just kind of additional information that was gathered from that survey. And then the last part will be just discussion and wrap up with next steps and kind of where we want to go from here. We'll just kind of see how far we get. So let's kick this off with Mike reviewing the task. Sorry.
Actually, I think Mike is going to talk about the first agenda item, which is the solution for the definition. That's the next slide, right, Mike? I would advance to the next slide just so we don't all get confused.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Are you going to walk through the task description document? I didn't think we were going to do that. Oh, sorry. I'm driving the slides. Yeah. So apologies. I forgot I was driving the slides. So I know, Meg, you asked me to look at these slides, but right now, I realize, just for everyone's clarification, with these fish work group tasks, we have so many tasks going on that we are asking for each task to have a description of what's the goal and what's the intended outcomes. And you all got that as part of the materials from Meg. So in addition to the agenda, you got a task description. That document was carefully crafted by Mike Bannock and Russell and Casey and Nancy. And honestly, I don't think we really need to go through it today unless people actually do have questions. What we were thinking is we would jump into the work, which I'm looking at the attendees. I think most, if not everyone, has been engaged in the DDT that Mike runs through StreamNet. So this is, what we're all about here is improving the data exchange standard that we use for CAP. That's the general idea. And so we have a few things specifically that we want to talk about today and offer solutions and get your feedback and set in motion. We probably won't get through all of the things that have been identified that we might talk about for that particular standard, but we'll see how far we get. So sorry, Meg, there were wrench in this.
Yeah, but, no, you're fine.
Does anyone have any questions about the task description document that you had emailed to you? So then I think we should, as you can see from the slide, this is Mike's agenda item. And you can see where it says current. And then your next slide, Mike, is the proposed. So I will stop. Sorry for the confusion.
Okay, so I'm not sure where we're going.
So Mike, you are sharing what is the situation with the definition of smolt equivalent.
Okay.
right? And then the next slide is, so this one is describing the status now and the situation that we want to try and improve. The next slide is your suggested improvement.
Okay, so yeah, so I've just got a few notes here, so let me go through them here. So we're talking about the juvenile outmigrants table. In that table, the number of fish to report varies by species and run and geographic area. For some of these, the DES calls for smolt equivalents. So this is for east side stream type Chinook, for steelhead, for coho, for coastal cuts, and for bull trout. So at the smolt workshop, the smolt numbers workshop, PNAMP held a couple of years ago, heard lots of people talking about it, that term on the side, some people kind of laughing about it, like, what's that mean? And so it became clear we needed to define what's meant by that term in the DES. So like Megan Jen said, Russell and Casey and I, along with some other people, have been working on that. So our plan is to include an appendix in the DES to help explain what that term means. Giving a few examples with starting from a real easy fake example and kind of working up to things that are more realistic. So that hopefully when people come across that, rather than being confused or laughing, they'll be able to say, oh, okay, that's what's meant. So I don't know if, so like you said, Jen, did everybody read through that, like that Appendix G that was one of the files that was for this? Is there anybody that didn't read through that before this meeting?
I will display it on the screen so you can see what Mike's referring to.
Yeah, so it sounds like everybody's seen it. Okay. So that's the proposal, to add that thing into the data exchange standard. Another part of that is we've got a link in there to a file that now lives on PNAMP's website, where the most another more complex example from ODFW lives there. So that'll just be in there as a link, because we don't want the DES to just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
I'll show you that one just so people are aware. This is the document Mike's referring to. It's
Right.
meant as an example so people can understand more how the application of this these words, I'll say for brevity, is used. So thank you, Casey and Polly, for putting that together. Okay. So the next slide, Mike.
Yeah. So looking through this, getting ready for this meeting and looking through all these things and looking back through the DES, I kind of realized we don't even have the term smolt equivalents actually defined in the DES. And I mean, we kind of do, but it's not explicit. I've got what I'm proposing, which is smolt equivalence is outmigrant numbers standardized to a single location at the smolt life stage. I think that's succinct and accurate, I hope. So that's what I would like to put into the DES or bring to the DDT for official adoption.
And Mike, the recommendation is the two previous, on this previous slide, there's two cells that use the word smolt equivalent, and is to put in that definition after those so people see it in the DES quickly and don't get confused and have to look for a glossary. It's just put that in the DES fields. So smolt equivalence parentheses is, people are okay with that definition, and putting that forward to the DES is what we're trying to, or the DDT team, to make that change is I think the first request we have. So if you went back one slide, you would see there's the smolt equivalent is used in two fields.
And Ethan's got his hand raised. Feel free to unmute yourself, Ethan, if you want to provide some feedback.
Okay, I just curious, and maybe Tim has some thoughts on this as well. You know, in the lower Snake and the more, I guess, interior populations, we see a lot of fish out migrating or emigrating in the spring that are not, based on a physical evaluation, would not be characterized as smolts. At my traps, we call them transitional. And so we have 3 categories: smolt, transitional, and par. So I guess I would just suggest that we add a transitional smolt life stage. It's just the fish are, we believe, or the data suggests that they are moving out. They're just not fully smolted, and they will become fully smolted as they progress downstream. If that makes sense.
I think that makes sense, and I think one of the things that we have next is to create a categorization that would define. So if you uploaded that one, type it the transitional, what would you get? And in this example, like, some people will use that transitional number and say, well, we're going to take that number and calculate that number based on lower granite to say this is the rate and give you a new number. But, you know, producing that number, that transitional number, is one of the things I think is a data set and is a value and should be reported, and people need to know it. And so I think that's one of the next steps is, what are those categories and how do we define those in the DES? So when you produce a number, is it an outmigrant? Is it a transitional? Is it pre-smolt? And we have the pre-smolt DES already. So
yeah, or another way of putting things, right now, the data exchange standard says if you have this type of fish in this area, then this is what you should report. So it sounds like, Ethan, that you're saying, yeah, that doesn't fit for what we have, for what you have. Is that right? For what you're able to provide?
I would report smolt as the combination of the summation of our smolt estimate and our transitional fish estimate. We include them as one, but they don't meet the physical. Most of the fish do not meet the physical definition of a smolt. That's all I'm trying to convey, versus par, which is what we'd be capturing right now at the trap. We have fish that are emigrating below the trap currently in November 2021 that are not smolts. They are out migrating. Hopefully they survive over winter below the trap and in the Snake River and out migrate next spring.
And that's the example that Casey provided and Tim provided, that, you know, we have fish that out migrate out, and if some people provide an estimate, it's going to be corrected for, but you also have that value of what that fish is, and how do you document and put that in a system. I think that categorization will help us. And so I think the next discussion that we have, you know, part of the first discussion is defining smolt equivalent, but the next part of this discussion is going to say, well, are we adequately defining the values or these life stages or timing within the data exchange standard for people to understand the data? So I think before we move on, I think the key question is this definition okay that you see at the top here? Or, you know, if people want to think we should edit it or tweak it, we can wordsmith it before we send it to the DDT. Does that sound right, Mike?
Yes.
I think the easy question is, if anybody has a concern on that definition, can we ask you to raise your hand? Otherwise, if everybody agrees, then I think we can proceed by just moving this piece forward.
Yeah. Is used to is bad. I don't like that. If we just say smolt equivalence is standardized out migrants numbers, from one or more locations in juvenile life stages to a single location at the smolt life stage. Get rid of that used to.
Right. I think it would be fair to say, because it's a definition. So yeah, it's not used to standardize. That's poor grammar. You're right, Mike.
Yeah.
We can fix the grammar. I think smolt equivalence is defined by this, right?
Yeah.
And
Is
this
concept,
part starts with the word standardized.
So for today, is that concept correct?
Yeah, we're talking about the concept.
Does everybody understand it? Does everybody agree that that's a good thing to use? And does everybody think for their fish that is useful where it's supposed to be, where it's called for in the DES right now?
And I like how Russ put it. It's easier in the setting, since we can't see your faces, to raise your hand or speak up. Just speak up. There's what, 8 of us, 10 of us. If you disagree, please speak up.
Well, one quick note as well, Jen, and part of the process is using Teams or using the forum, that we want to share this definition and have a place online for people to edit it. So if there is concern, we're not sending emails back and forth, but we're trying to use the Teams environment or Google Docs to share that. But hopefully, if we're all good with it, we don't have to create that and put a shared environment to do the final editing.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to see an addition of a transitional stage in there, not just the smolt life stage. The example here from the Umatilla is slightly different. They're considering everything smolt.
So you're saying explicitly call that out in it, right, Ethan?
I think so, yeah.
Well, to help clarify, I think the first part is we were just wanting to define the term smolt equivalent.
Yep.
What is that? The next phase is that we want to classify the other terms that may exist. So in the DES, it says smolt equivalent, and it's a vague term and nobody understood it. So we just wanted to define it. And the next phase and the next task, if we went forward one more slide eventually, would come down to the how do we categorize the fish, transitional or others? And so I think we may need to have an additional definition or something added within this to help you categorize that.
Sure, I just think that a transitional fish is a smolt equivalent, and that should be spelled out at that.
In that definition.
That's my opinion. I'm happy to hear other justifications.
Could it be something to clarify? We add a clause that says could include, what were your 3? I already forgot. I'm a little fuzzy today. Smolt transitional par, or for example, smolt transitional par. Something to have those words in there to indicate that, because when you say when we write smolt equivalent, that is, people are going to think it's that narrower definition, right? So if you guys could add a phrase or something in parentheses that has those 3 bins, I think that would help Ethan.
I think I have it. I think, Ethan, you're saying that when you're doing your data, some of them are not quite smolts. They're about to be, you consider these pre-smolts to be, or transitionals to be, as good as a smolt. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And to me, this definition reads like it is only at the smolt life stage.
Okay.
Okay,
based on that.
Can you?
The last 3 words of that sentence.
Okay.
Sorry, I keep clicking around. Thought I could edit the slide, but I don't really think I can. Actually, I guess if I do this, I can edit it. So is it in the smolt life stage? So should it say smolt,
Don't change that, Jen. I think the solution lies elsewhere. Although I guess we're here to talk about that. So sorry, I'm a little fuzzy this morning too. Yeah, I think what the thing is, I think probably the DES is good, but we can add this in as another example. So I think, you know, right, the way this Smolt equivalence thing works is if you've got power moving out past the trap in the fall, you apply a survival rate to when they would be smolts. I think what Ethan's saying is these are transitionals, and it's just like, hey, we're going to call those 100% survival. We're calling them as good as a smolt. And so in that case, you know, transitional would be included with smolts. It would be something to just include in the methods when they provide data, but it is a good thing for us to add into the examples in this. It is a good thing to add into the examples that we have for this appendix.
I just think what Jen and everybody's just saying is let's just edit the definition to include that, because I'm reading and hearing something different from Ethan, which I kind of agree with, is that, you know, we're trying to, the smolt equivalent is what's calculated as a smolt eventually. And what are the equivalents of smolts, and that there's a percentage of transitionals that make it, whatever. It's you're using a series of different fish at different life stages, which include smolts, transitionals, or others,
Okay.
to calculate that. And rather than, and I think this is one of the things we're trying to do. So I really want us to move away from these meetings talking about the definitions, and to try to use the forum and the tool where we can have a document that people can agree, make a comment on, and make the edits.
I hear you, Russ, but I think we're really close on this one.
Yeah.
If that would satisfy Ethan's case without disrupting what you guys had already been thinking, right? By just what I added there at the end. Maybe it should be in parentheses instead of a comma, but.
I see Tim has his hand up.
Yeah, Tim, go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, I was, I think you could add a bunch of categories here, and the question is to what end? And so I'm thinking we distinguish between, at least in years when we got good returns, we see fish leaving in the summer too. They don't survive very well, and there's an obvious break in survival between them and the fish that leave it in the fall. And so we distinguish those when we calculate smolts at Lower Granite Dam. So, you know, how many categories do we need to be all inclusive, or just add a couple examples and call it good? That's my comment.
I think it's probably good with this that when you're defining the smolt equivalent, you're covering a series of categories. It could just be smolts, period, or it could be the other life stages. And the next field that we're trying to deal with is a categorization of the location, because that location, is it at the trap? Is it in the population? Is it an estimate down at Lower Granite? There's a lot of different ways that people produce it. Lemhi River has 5 estimates every year that are provided. You know, what value is it that, you know, that they're based on different locations, they're based on different aggregates. So just trying to help define that, I think is enough in this case.
Right, but I think for this, Russ, we're still talking about life stage.
Correct.
And I see Tim's point about could be a lot of slicing and dicing, but I think I see Ethan's point where he read the smolt life stage, and that signaled to him too narrow. So Tim is saying, be careful. We could make a very long list of other cases. So I think somewhere in between there, perhaps. And maybe it's something more like, you know, such as, you know, and then we don't have to add a whole ton of examples, but we acknowledge that it isn't just smolts more clearly.
Well, take out par.
I see Tim's comment. Having worked on his traps in Idaho, he's probably right.
Right. So location is critical, and I mean,
I don't think you should include par. I'll stop there. I got nothing else to add on this topic.
Those do not. Is that what you said? You said do not, Ethan, or do?
Do not include par.
Okay, got it. I thought you said that earlier. So, all right. Is that satisfactory?
That's good for now, I think. Yeah.
I think the only question for Tim, if you want to elaborate, is that the timing is relevant. If you wanted to put anything, because that's one of the things that we're trying to deal with on the next thing is if timing of the run is an element of it, and it's important to define or distinguish. Otherwise, we're good.
So further clarify the timing in this definition, Russell.
I just want to know if Tim thinks that we need to, like, early smolts, late smolts, if there's a need to define and categorize that.
Not from my standpoint.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim.
Maybe you whack that out. I do like the idea of having something parenthetically that signals that this isn't a super narrow application of this definition. It is complicated and the location is critical, right? So maybe we should move to the next
Well,
one.
we just heard from Tim and
yeah, to actually cut it, because we already say one or more locations at life stages above. So I think we're okay.
Tim and Ethan both said, yeah, get rid of that. Okay.
So then,
okay. So let me, I've got all these great notes. So anyway, as Russ and Casey and I were working on this, there were a few other places, very minor DES changes. I mean, this thing we're working on now, it doesn't really change things. We're just trying to clarify, you know, moved wording around in a couple of places and generalized language in one place. Let's what did I write here? We will need to include a link to that explanation/appendix in the downloaded data as well, so data end users can see what the data mean. Okay, so whatever we come up with here today, we're going to provide it through the query system too. So when NIMS or BPA or whoever downloads the data, the definition will, you know, what does all this mean, will go along with it. So at this point, for what we've talked about so far, I think we're ready to take this to the DDT. Is this, anybody disagree with that? Okay.
Cool.
So second, go ahead, Russ.
So just to clarify, are you talking about this definition and you're saying we're good? I think people need a second to understand the category we're adding.
I was trying to say before we get to this category thing. Okay, so there's a second topic which is on the screen now. So Russ has had some frustration and he spent too much of his time trying to figure out where out migrant numbers are relative to the geographic boundaries of the populations, because he's like dealing with the whole Columbia Basin and none of us are terribly, you know, have all this stuff down. There's so many different places. So he's looking for something that will help him out. Are these numbers where the fish leave their home population area? Is it some spot within the population boundary? Is it somewhere significantly downstream from where the population boundary is? And so we're proposing, or is there other classifications that might be useful? So we're going to propose to the DDT this field that's showing here, or something like it, to classify where these out-migrant estimates are made relative to the population boundary. We think this item probably needs a bit more thought, but this is what we've come up with so far, and we're wondering what people think of these three options, and are these the correct three options? Are more needed? Are they worded okay?
Casey, I just do a quick check. Casey, for some reason, I pulled up something different and I had a document in the background. I thought we ended up with 2 definitions within the population boundary or downstream of the population boundary. Did you have 3, or were there 2 that you came down to as a final recommendation, Casey?
Can you hear me, Russ?
Yes.
Okay. I honestly, I can't quite remember. I thought, I can't remember what we came up with.
Can I share something really quickly? Because I have I copied and put in a separate document on the Teams. What would be the options for it?
Are these just 2 of these 3, Russ?
It's 2 of the 3, but they have specific definitions behind them, which aren't included on this.
Okay. Let's see.
So let me just share.
This is Nadine. On the handouts that you guys sent are 2. I don't know if that helps, but
thank you, Nadine. It is correct. It's the 2.
Is that on this one, Russ? No.
These were the definitions. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
And when we talked about this, the question that came up, when you produce a Smolt estimate and there's a number, a lot of people leave comments or things blank, and there's a Smolt equivalent location field, and it's just supposed to define kind of, a location. But one of the things that we're just trying to figure out is, are these within the population boundary, or are they downstream of the population boundary? And discussions came in, is it really a life stage, a timing, or is there a different way to characterize this? So what is that estimate, so that when people are looking at information, that we have a way to make sure that this is going to sound ridiculous, Smolt equivalents are equivalent when you're comparing them. So if you're, how do you know that a Smolt estimate that you're looking at is equivalent to something else that's being produced within the DES? And I think we see several examples within the DES where people are submitting estimates down to a downstream life stage at Lower Granite. Some people are producing population level estimates within the population boundary, or is there some other type of estimate that people are producing? And it's just something that I think is good to clarify, because as I said, as an example, the LEMHI has multiple values that are produced for each year, some that are within a population, some that are Lower Granite estimates, and some that are used at a different location within information from, the comparative survival study. So I'm just trying to make sure we have clear definitions of what these locations are, and if we can categorize them, if it makes sense or not. And so that's the proposal, is to categorize them to these proposed definitions, or figure out if there's some other type of category that makes sense. And Jen, if you do have the definitions, go ahead. You can post it. This is on the Microsoft Teams page for the CAP DES work group, and it's a place that we can share this link and edit these if we need to.
Is that the link you dropped in the chat, Meg?
I think so. I was scared to open it up in case it crashed.
No, I'm just checking in case people are trying to follow along.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll similarly don't want to navigate away, Russ. This is fine. Thank you for bringing it up. So what do people think? This is an addition, correct, to the DES?
Correct. It's creating
adding a field.
Right. So the stuff I was talking about earlier is just clarification of stuff that exists already. This would be an addition, a new field. And I would think we would ask everybody to update their data, their existing data, but it should be easy for everybody, because there's not a million data and everybody knows pretty well. It would be an easy thing for them to fill out.
or if you guys disagree and don't think that we need it and that just the definition should be enough. But what I was seeing is that, just as a use of caution for life cycle modelers or anybody else, that if they're just downloading the data that says it's a Smolt equivalent for a population estimate, and it's outside of a population boundary or inside of a population boundary, I think there are differences, especially with timing. When are these estimates made? Is it for a run at a given date? Is there some way that we can make it equivalent across the basin, that these are estimates that are typically derived by a certain date? I don't know if that's relevant or needed. It's just a question that hopefully biologist Tim, Ethan, or others may have some feedback on.
I would throw out there, we live in this world. These words are all familiar to us. If someone was a little less familiar, would population boundary be sufficient? Is that a well-established, and everyone knows what that would be for not just the idea of a boundary, but the specific? If someone found a piece of data and it said this was inside the, John Day steelhead population boundary, is that sufficient? Feel free to tell me, yes, it's great. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think these are reasonable definitions to include.
Thanks, Ethan. Any concerns or edits? I like how it's short and sweet with 2 choices.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Russ, can you copy that and can you email those two to me so I can have the right language to put into the draft DES?
Yeah, I will email it. And the next step for this is that based on this conversation, this will go to the broader DDT as a recommendation, and more people may provide comments. But we just want to make sure before this goes forward that the biologists and other people say that this makes sense. And I think that's what we've heard. And if people have anything, speak up, use the chat, say that you might like to wordsmith it a little bit in the next week or two. That's fine. But I think we're okay.
Okay, then I'm going to take control back, Ross.
Yeah, and I put that in the Teams folder.
Thank you. All right.
I'll send that as an
email
or text.
Yes.
Okay. So we're back to the regular programming. That was agenda item 1. There were some changes proposed to the existing standard. Now, why does this say? It was an agenda item 1 and 2. Sorry. So the next topic here is specifically, gosh, I'm just having trouble with my mouse today. I barely bump it and it jumps. Russ, you're going to take this, right? Talking
Correct.
about the age. Okay, let me do this here. There you go.
So there is a proposed action from recent discussions from the DDT group to remove the age component, definitely from NOSA recruits per spawner, and because it's repetitive, there's duplication of data sometimes. So there's an effort to potentially remove that, document additional methods, and people do age analysis completely different from a spawner estimate sometimes. So it's that age analysis sometimes is within the group, different contractors are doing it. It's not being uploaded. So there's a question, should age data be removed from these DESs and put in its own DES field? And I thought, there's an action to say, yes, we're going to do that. But I just thought it would be good while we're talking with the juvenile data, because I looked at the juvenile data, and the juvenile data to me has a different age classification definition than what you see for all the adults. But I didn't, and sometimes that age classification is what is a percentage. When a person produces a Smolt estimate, they will say 50% is X class, summer class, different pieces. So I just wanted to find out from the survey that was taken, do you think that juvenile data, age data, in the DE, it should stay within the juvenile DES, and we're getting it in, it's right, or should the age data fields be a separate data exchange standard for age data and analysis that is done and conducted separately and then related to those estimates? That's, I think, the question. We're not asking for a definitive, answer, but it will help us figure out what the scope of that next working group is.
So the question is, leave it as is or separate things out? Right, Russ?
Correct.
Short as possible. What do people think? This is a discussion. This is not a decision yet. We're just looking for feedback.
I have a question. This is Nadine. Because did we agree for the adults to put age as a separate table? Is that right?
We've agreed to work on pulling the age data out. So we haven't started work on it yet. And I didn't know.
I guess I'm curious what the reasoning. Sorry.
Go ahead, Nadine. Why don't you finish your thought and then Mike? It's hard.
I was curious. I can't remember, or maybe I just don't know yet what the reasoning is behind that. I'm sure there's a good one. I just don't know what it is.
Behind moving the age data out, just for clarification. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I can help answer two of the reasons behind why there's recommendations to move the age data out is people cannot submit age data independent of an estimate. And a lot of times different agencies or entities are doing the age analysis outside of a population estimate and providing that in different regions. So people aren't allowed to update it. And so a lot of the age data is left blank in the DES for adults, and it's done. Also, there's things that are going on as far as how that age data is being calculated and documenting the methods, whether it's an interpolation across an MPG or other things. So the methodology and the documentation of how that age estimate is being produced, for that population, is it from within the MPG or a specific population estimate? I think were some of the discussions with Mari from NOAA and a few other people that made that recommendation that kind of called that into question. So because a lot of the age data fields were being left blank in the adult NOSA field, and the reason provided by Nez Perce is they said, well, we don't have it. It's conducted by a different agency, and that agency isn't allowed to upload or add it independently. So.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess maybe would the reasoning apply to the juvenile then as well? Would be help answer the question maybe.
This is Casey. I was also going to add on to that Russell's explanation too. I mean, part of it, I think that like Mari is also looking for with the age data is just that some extra information that's not in the NOSA table that wouldn't really be applicable to the NOSA data, but would be applicable to age data. So, how many fish were actually aged versus the extrapolation to the population level. And so I guess, and so that's a good thought, Nadine, in that, does it work the same way for juvenile data? I also think another reason that for the age data is it's often delayed for adults. And so we may have all the NOSA data, but not age data for another year until scales have been read and what have you. Is that, so for other folks, is that the same with juvenile data, or are all the fish aged at the same time? And in our case, we kind of the juvenile data we've given, everything is sort of one age. And so I'm not sure if it would be helpful for our specific, like Grandma and Chinook, to pull the age data out. But that's just, 4 populations that I'm thinking of off the top of my head.
And Tim and Mari, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, this is Mari. Thanks Casey for that. And I will say that the push that I have done to separate the age data from the NOSA is primarily because we don't get age data metadata when it's buried within the NOSA table. So I would think that the same would apply here. And even if an agency across the board does the juvenile age data the same way, it doesn't necessarily mean agency to another entity is going to have the same methods. And so having some metadata attached to the age data helps folks know outside of, you know, the small circle if they can combine data sets. Tim?
So I missed some of what Mari was saying because my connection's bad, but I think her point is valid in that there's enough complexity in how aging is done that maybe it needs a place where you can provide those details. I mean, you could age fish by length, you could age them by the timing at the trap, or for steelhead, you know, you collect a bunch of scales and do that. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And if you're extracting the ages from the adult DES, then it makes sense to do that for the juveniles too.
And I think that will help. And I think the implications are, and it will be brought up to the age work group that will hopefully be kicking off here soon. To, I think, bring it up on its own task, look at it and evaluate it as a separate piece. The key is that there has to be a good identifier to link the data between the years that they're associated, the population data set that they're associated with, so that there's a good linkage between, you know, estimate numbers that are provided for the juvenile outmigrants that would then have a related juvenile component. And I think the other piece is that with the age data, one of the other pieces is it would reduce redundancy of data entry into the other DESs for SARS and recruits responders, because they have to add in the age data again to those data sets versus having a separate DES that would call it out. And I think that will help with the juvenile component as well for the recruits responder or SARS data sets that might be used in referencing juveniles. So I think we have an answer, and I think it, Tim, Mari, and others, I think, you know, based on the discussion, I think it makes sense to discuss that with that larger group as a next step when that task kicks off. Does it sound correct?
I agree.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I see. So this will help us formulating the agenda for one of those next meetings on when we start the age DES to be mindful of the juvenile component as well, and that it may need to be disentangled from this DES. Should we move to the next topic?
Anybody not ready? It's me, apparently. There we go.
To help, the last piece that I had related to is agenda item 3B. It's terms used in recruits responders, SARS, and outmigrants DES. One of the things I noticed is that the Smolt equivalent location field, they're all defined differently. So when people are entering in Smolts or Smolt equivalents, how the different DESs for SARS, recruits responder, and juvenile outmigrants reports or defines them is different. And I thought it would be good for biologists or other people to say it's okay, or B, look that we should probably look for some consistency in how we're defining these and ensuring that, you know, ideally the Smolt information that's being used in recruits responder should be coming from the outmigrant DES. And, you know, there might be some linkages, but I just saw and there were comments in the survey that these were different And so I just want to open it up for discussion. Should these be the same, or is it okay to have them be different?
We need the Jeopardy clock or something. I think people are digesting, Russ. I'm not sure that I'm not willing to say that no one has any feedback. I think they're still thinking it through. I will say that if there's any potential for confusion, that we should have consistent definitions. But I think what Russ is actually saying is the terms. So we're trying to think of this in two bits. There's the term or the label for the concept that you're talking about, and then there's a definition. We definitely don't want to have the same term, like banana, refer to something that looks, red and is crunchy, and something that is orange and juicy, right? If we're using the same label, the definition needs to be consistent. But I think Russ is trying to point is how these things relate.
Russ, has it caused you trouble comparing these things when you're looking?
I'd say when we look at larger life cycle models and processes, I get concerned when I see things that are being put in the system or the data sets that don't have consistent definitions. That if you have an outmigrant assessment, a value of a Smolt equivalent that is then being used and compared to as a Smolt number that was a Smolt at a trap versus a Smolt at lower granite, if people aren't comparing these, and I've seen it happen within some of the regional analyses from some life cycle modeling groups that they're comparing all the Smolt estimates as equivalent, and I don't see them as such. And there are cases, I'm looking at the middle one, the number of Smolts marked, as you can see, that's not a definition that we use within the Smolt equivalent location, and that may be just people are using SARS and using fish that are pit tagged, period. And I just thought that this information could use a review from other biologists, because I have problems. Me and Brian Mashoff have been looking at the data and trying to do some comparisons, looking at information, because we haven't. I'll take it back. I have not seen many recruits respond or Rupers data sets being produced or SARS data is being produced outside of the CSS project. So, and I know we fund a lot of assessments. I don't see values in the coordinated assessments to date. And I do see there's, some potential reasons might be this, as among other reasons.
So Russ, what would need to change to satisfy, to clarify?
Well, I think the key question is it okay to have completely different definitions in all of these fields? Or should there be some continuity between those definitions? And we just came up with a categorization component within the Smolt equivalent location that's provided in addition. Perhaps that categorization may be necessary for SARS for recruits per spawner. I just noted that, is the definition of Smolt equivalent location clear, given these other definitions that are provided? Should we edit that Smolt equivalent location definition?
When I look at what we've got here, the middle column to me looks qualitatively different. So the two outside columns are saying, where is the place that you made this number, made this estimate? The middle one is, what is the number that you used for numerator or denominator, whichever it is? What went into your ratio.
Okay.
It's not a location one. So I don't think that middle column applies here. And then if you just look at the two outside columns, getting ready for this, I actually went into the DES and pulled out all these location type things. And I always try to, between tables, I always try to make things, you know, I find things don't, like you're saying, they don't end up as consistent as you would hope. So I try to hunt down consistencies and get rid of them. And I looked at this and I came up with, you know, they're the ones that are specifically locations. It's like, yeah, they're all really close, but I'm seeing some difference in the what's in the DES. I haven't gone back to look and really kind of scratch my head and say, okay, is there a reason that this is different in this table than in this other table? I guess that would be a good task for me to do, to look at these things. But I think in your examples here, this
I think for these specific ones,
different.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think the specific definition for Smolt equivalent location and the RPRS specific name locations, that those are talking about the same thing, essentially, the location where a number was calculated. So those ought to be consistent. If the Smolt equivalent one has some additional information that's specific to a Smolt equivalent estimate versus recruit abundance, I mean, that's the question there. Are those different things? The recruit abundance versus Smolt equivalent, are you calculating two different things? And if so, then that might need to be added. But the location part, I think, should be exactly the same. I mean, they seem to be the same concepts. You've got water body, fluvial, lentic, a dam, right? The Smolt equivalent has a little bit more information, so maybe you add that to the other one. And again, I agree with Mike. The middle column doesn't seem to be about. It's a different concept. Period.
Yeah, the middle one is what is the number. The outside two are where, like you said a minute ago, where were those numbers determined? What's your different concepts?
So let's start with the first part. Do people agree that the first column and the third column are talking about the same thing, and therefore the definition should be consistent? Thank you, Ross. Like it?
Yeah, because I look at the examples, a dam or other location where the fish numbers can be estimated is the far right column, and the other one just says the dam. I think we can just do work to make sure that those things are identical and more inclusive if necessary. I do agree the middle one is different, but I think it kind of gives me pause just looking at the definitions. Juveniles leaving the tributary or mouth, juveniles leaving the population boundary. And it may deal with the classification definition that we just were kind of getting at, but I do think it's kind of the method of how they are marked to know that we're there. And my only question is, are those things important to be in the DES for juveniles then, if we don't have it for an outmigrant? You know, if you have a smolt outmigrant, I think it comes down to the methods, but if you're only counting smolts as the fish that you've marked, I don't think you'd ever really get it as a smolt population estimate.
Okay. So to help me make sure I'm getting what you're saying, Russ, for the column in the middle, SARS, the concept is how the number of smolts is defined as an element of smolt to adult returns. And what you see there are the list of acceptable values as currently in the data exchange standard. So I think what Russ is saying is, does that list, is it sufficient and thorough enough to fully define the term at the top? I think Russ is saying no. Or are you saying it's inconsistent with some other place in the standard?
I just want to make sure it's consistent. The question is it doesn't need to be consistent with the smolt equivalent location stuff. And this is something just for us to comment on before our next discussion. But I think if we agree that the ones on the edges should be identical, we can work on that. And I just would like people to take away looking at the SARS definitions and ask, if people are inputting Smolt equivalent information from the Smolt DES, that's easy. But is there a redundancy, or the categorization thing that we just used or proposed in the previous thing we put under Mike? We see acceptable values of smolts out migrating past a point, multiple points, leaving a tributary mouth, or leaving a population boundary. Is that part of the categorization within the population, an MPG estimate, something else that may be happening? I don't know. I just think when I looked at the data, I think it will be helpful for people to, as I said, I don't see a lot of SARS data at this time being entered into the DES. And I think at a point when more people start entering their SARS information into the DES, this may come up to be a question or an issue. And I was just trying to highlight it, that maybe it's okay, and it's okay to have some different definitions, because sometimes that's using Smolt marks and using PID tag data to do SARS analysis is not using Smolt equivalent data and not using Smolt production data. It's a different method and approach for how SARS is estimated. So I think it's appropriate. I just wanted to check if there is some need for consistency across these data sets, or the DESs.
So what do others think about the SARS thread here, this term, this particular element of the SARS standard? Is this an issue we should tee up for discussion in the future? Or is this something that we're not really seeing as needed to be discussed at the moment?
Hey,
Tim had
Jen,
mentioned
I think.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Tim had just mentioned in the comments, if you're trying to estimate smolts per spawner, the location should be the same for Smolt equivalent.
Thanks, Mike.
I think Nadine, I think it would be helpful for the DDT team to go through this with a fine-tooth comb, especially in context with the rest of the DES. The fields that are around each one of these.
Kind of breaking up, Nadine. I think I missed the end of that.
So I think it would just be helpful to look at this in context of the rest of the DES in these areas, and address it, looking really closely. Like, it's hard to do, I think, by looking at this one field from each area and make a decision.
I could send out my very ugly thing where I looked at all I took all the location fields from the DES and put them all into a table and arranged them all the same and color coded to say, okay, if it's the same color, it's the same thing, and colored, and I put it in color coding if something was added. It's like, okay, these two are the same, but except the second one has this extra stuff. Then it's got some. So I can send that out to the folks on this. And you can see.
So I think that sounds like an idea as a next step. Is that to help us evaluate it, Mike, if you can produce that to show us the different values and the definitions, we can have it as a component for those who are able to take a look at that to see what we see at the end of this. So I think the two steps are, I think, outside of this meeting, I have a document that has these definitions and a Word document on the files and for Microsoft Teams that we can kind of make some common, minor edits. I don't think it will change anything. It's just definition edits for future data entry for recruits per spawner and for improving the definitions. I don't think it necessarily may change the values or the results that you see within the DES. So I think it would be something that you can come easy to make a change. That later analysis that Mike is saying, if we can provide that to show us the values that we see for equivalent locations and the locations within SARS and Smolt equivalents to see what they look like, and by population or whatever is being produced, it could help us inform some decision related to the SARS information or how that categorization occurs.
Yeah. So you all seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So just when I send it to you, so like this is just regular black text on white. This is the NOSA table up here, the water body field. If we go to SAR Smolt location field, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's got an S here and IES in parentheses here. And so in each one of these, I've got fluvial is the first one, and then reservoir is the second one, and lentic is the third one, and then supercoats is the fourth one, and a dam is the fifth one. And just this one other RPRS one has other as appropriate in it. So they're all in the same order. You can kind of see what's different. And then when there's this orange background, that's the same as something else, but this orange background stuff is added in here. So
wow.
When I looked at I'm not expecting. I just wanted to show that to you quick. So when I send it to you, hopefully you won't go, hey, quite as long.
That's I think a good summary, Mike, and thank you for putting them in the same colors for each field. And it shows that recruits per spawner, we have 1, 3, and 5, and we're missing other ones, and maybe those other things are okay to be omitted. But it's also nice to show the highlights of the missing definitions. So thank you, Mike.
I think it's great analysis. Yeah, can we structure this like we are doing for the HCACs, where we have more tables here. So we have table, you would have field name or term, as we're calling it, and then you have the definition. I don't know what usage is. I mean, what we have is a term, and then we're defining it, or you just want it. You're pulling out a portion of the definition.
I think this is probably this is what's in the.
It's the fourth column after the definition. It's guide codes and covariate guidelines for what your field value should be.
Yes.
Nadine recommended including a legend for what the colors mean.
Oh, okay.
I think we're opening up more confusion with respect to what are the definitions of these terms by not including that. The previous conversation was all about the definitions. So, especially if we're asking biologists who may not be as familiar with the data exchange standard document as some of the data steward experts. So that's my suggestion. But I think this is awesome, Mike, and I think it's great. And, in a perfect world 10 years ago when we did this, we would have realized that as we talked about each piece one at a time, we weren't being careful of the last conversation. So, I mean, everyone can see these are different tables, and we just, it was a little loose. So I think this would be awesome.
And what I came away with this after studying it was it's a little loose, but it's just barely loose. I mean, there's no difference. There's no real difference between this and this, Right. And actually, if you look at number 1, across,
can this group agree that we let Mike have that authority where it's so simple that there's like one's plural, one's not, one's, has dam and weir, one has dam, weir, and trap. I mean, I trust Mike. I don't know. Maybe that's a question for the DDT. But I'm just trying to think of people's time. And this is obviously at least 2 pages, right, Mike? Or is this all of it for this one topic?
This is all of it.
Okay.
This is all of it. And, this was, each of these were talked about when each one of these tables were made. And we started with the NOSA table, and I forget if we went to ARPARES or SIR next, I forget, but I'm pretty sure that every time we went back and we referred to what we had already and said, okay, do we need these? And but it's always worth looking at again. DES is a living document, and like I said, over the years, I've tried to be consistent in these things unless there's a good reason not to. So there's a little bit of inconsistency here. Does that mean I screwed up, or does that mean there was a good reason for there being the inconsistency?
Right.
So my quick comments here are, thank you for numbering them. I think, for people who might be colorblind, you might have a problem with the greens and reds. And I think if everything is numbered sequentially and that they're all in the equivalent category, you don't need the color coding for the different 1, 2, 3, and 4. So okay. I think that's but just showing the highlighting the text that is different. And I do note that juvenile out migrants does have a significant additional amount of text added relative to the other ones, and maybe that's okay. So it was just some notes for us to look at, and if people think that the definitions should be, if we're missing if some of these fields are missing, like SARS is missing number 4, and recruits responders missing 2 and 4. If those are needed, it'd be good to find out and make a recommendation. So I think the takeaway is, Mike, if we all agree, Mike, if the minor edits I think are good. If people think that the differences between, there's a large text difference in the Smolt equivalent definitions, does it help, or is it something that could help with the other ones, or if there's something different? I'll stop now. So I think it's a takeaway. We'll share that information. Mike, we'll make a little edit. We'll pass it off to everybody, and there's no need for an answer today. But for our next meeting, we'll try to get some more feedback from everybody if they think the definitions should change and how we should handle it. So that will give us time for our last topic here, Jen, if we want to transition over, unless there's any other last comments that people want to make on this.
Thanks, Russ and Mike. And I think the silence is probably people digesting stuff. And I hope that you all are getting the feeling, Mike, you did not screw up. I'm going to say that right now. It was an evolution of things over time, right? And so for everyone's benefit, what we're trying to do is just tidy stuff up. And part of this is, we had a survey last year where we got some feedback. Nancy talked about some of the other feedback in a second. Also, we're building a new standard for hatchery data, and so it's giving us opportunity to reflect back. And sometimes we go back and look at the other standard and say, maybe we should poke at that, right? So it's not anything is super broken. We're just trying to improve it constantly, as Mike said, a living document. Thank you, Mike and Russ, for being the detail guys that you are. Can notice these things and tease it out. All right, Nancy.
So this last agenda item is going to be a lot simpler for people. This is more of a teaser. For most of you, a subset of you at least, were part of the CAP-DDT survey that Mike sent out earlier this year and of last year, where we basically sent out a whole bunch of questions saying, you've been living and breathing this document, you've been sharing data through it, trying to get the data into the correct format, following the DES. What can we do to improve the content? And the survey had, I can't remember how many questions, but we really dove into all parts of DES. We even had the opportunity for folks to go and do live edit in the draft version of the DES so that you could really provide comments of this really doesn't make sense, or this could be improved, or we're lacking something, similar in fashion to the topic that Mike and Russell just discussed. So we haven't forgotten all the work that you put into that survey. We've been digesting it, and one of the things that we've been doing with all the input we receive is trying to figure out which group is the best fit to address those different types of issues that were flagged. Some of the work is already ongoing through the CAP-DDT or a subset of the CAP-DDT. And other topics, we've been overlapping with them through a different process where we've been taking a look at how we can improve the quality assurance and control process that we have in place to make sure the data that's coming into our system is as tight as can be, and that it actually does match the intent of the field. Sort of like, okay, what you're doing today is discussing the guidance that would guide what comes into the system, but we also have other processes in place to double check that that is what we're receiving on our end. So based on all the input we received, we did a quick assessment of what we thought could be a good fit for the fish monitoring work group, this arena that brings in a lot more of the expert biologists and data stewards together to discuss specific topics. And then we also flag other topics that will pop up in different venues, such as the CAP-DDT or in the planning, in the works, fish monitoring work group, CAP-DDT QA/QC workshop that we're going to be discussing more in 2022. So this is not meant to be an all-inclusive list. This is more of a teaser based on what we saw in a CAP survey, which on the CAP-DDT survey that we put on the DES. That's a lot of acronyms, but the Core Assessment Partnership Data Exchange Standard Survey that was completed by the development team, the DES development team. And some of the topic that popped up was things of how can we get the biologist input on helping us improve the juvenile out migrant data exchange standard to make sure that all the different variation of data that's being collected out there could fit. And that probably will overlap a bit with some of the conversation we already had on some other topics today. Can we further refine the Smolt to adult return field in terms of like adding fields that would then allow us to more specifically describe how many fish were removed along the way before you get to the Smolt to adult return estimate? Are there some missing fields associated with the escapement field that we just added last June? Like, do we want to add some additional metrics to provide more value to this new field that describes escapement? The pop fit one has been popping up through different venues as one that needs more guidance. We have the DES that does it, really good job of describing what we want people to flag as same, whole, partial for pop fit multiple. But what we're seeing on our end is sometimes the individual is talking about a population estimate, but that population estimate is not necessarily synced up with NOAA's idea of what the population really reflects. So there could be some additional guidance to tighten up how people are flagging whether their estimate represents a whole population, multiple, or portion. And some additional guidance that could go into what type of notes are being put inside the population, the pop fit note field. That's in general is an area that we'll be looking at all those text box, comment box, note fields that we have to make sure that when folks put in content in a given field, it makes sense for that content to be in there, and that people outside of our universe can actually understand what's in there, because there's no point writing something in there that no one's going to understand a year from now. And then one that popped up more recently from the HCX, the Hatchery Coordinate Assessment Exchange process that Jen briefly referred to, is one of the groups of hatchery fish indicators and metrics that we were interested in developing more fully to have those type of data flow through the Coordinate Assessment Partnership database, the CAX. Had to do with HOSA, hatchery origin, spawner abundance, escapement for hatchery fish, PNI related to hatchery fish, and record per spawner for hatchery fish. And we had originally flagged those to be discussed with the hatchery biologists, managers, and others that are involved in HCAX. But as we were working with them all throughout 2021, it became apparent that they're not the ones collecting these data or analyzing these data. It's actually the folks out in the stream. So on the December 9th meeting with the HCAX, we're going to propose that these specific indicators and metrics get sent back to either the CAP-DDT or this particular fish monitoring work group, task group, to vet the definition and tighten these up so that they will work for the hatchery data that's being collected. Some of these are currently in our DES, but we haven't really, formally vetted them with a broad group yet. And to some extent, they are being used by some of the data providers, so they've been tested a little bit. So those are just teasers of what's coming up next. So we're hoping that the members and participants of this task group are going to remain engaged. We think and it will provide more input to us on all these other aspects of related to the coordinated assessment partnership, so that we can keep this forum as a good place to get that broader biologist input on how we can tighten up the guidance and the quality of the data coming into our system. That's all I have for this one. If you guys really want to see all the detailed survey result, let me know and we can send them to you. But it's quite the Excel spreadsheet with lots of comment. And then we've also done a summary document of it to try and collapse some of that input into groups. Any questions? Back to you, Jen. Or Meg.
Okay.
Not sure who's in charge.
Meg?
Yeah, I'll do the wrap up in next text. If you want to go to the next slide, Jen. So basically, if you guys want access to the Microsoft Team files, this is a way to do it. I'm going to send you a link to our project page, which has the exact same information. If you're part of DOI, it's pretty simple. If you are not, it's a little bit more complicated. If you absolutely cannot get into the system, I know some agencies are not allowing it. We can provide alternate versions. So just let me know, or Russ or Mike, or I guess Nancy, if you guys want some of the survey stuff. And so I feel like the next step was we're going to try to agree to a next meeting date, or at least respond or confirm the proposed changes. I don't know what you're feeling, Russ and Mike, if you want to send out a doodle, or, if you're thinking beginning of January, or, how much time do you guys feel like you need?
Muted, Russ.
I think it's just good to hear from some of the bios, how busy you guys are in the next few weeks. If we should be looking at January or February just to follow up on, and giving people some time to look at the definitions and categories for the recruits responder and the definition SARS recruits responder and that information, and potentially some of the survey information that Nancy had as a teaser. So we'll provide that. But realistically, it does late January or February seem like a reasonable time to follow up. And I'll stop there. Over.
So that would be to follow up on some of the topics that we talked about today, if we need to clarify, which is I think the last one we did, and then maybe tackle some, if not all, of these the items that Nancy shared. So we're trying to signal to you that we had a bunch of feedback on the survey last year. We're trying to work our way through it in a reasonable timeline to not burden you guys. But it also does take some pre-work time for folks like Mike, especially, and also Russ. Casey helped us a whole bunch with the materials you see for today.
And
so we
Tim,
don't want to say we're going to,
yeah.
and Tim. So I didn't want to say we're like, hey, we're going to meet again next week and wrap this up. It's a little more complicated. And Russ just threw out end of January, early February. So if somebody sent you a doodle, would that be reasonable? A lot of crickets today, Meg.
People are typing.
Ethan feels like that time frame is reasonable.
That time frame is reasonable for me too, Jen and Russell.
Thanks, Casey. Tim's in agreement too. That time frame is fine for him.
Yeah, we'll see based on the content that we can share, and that's what we'll shoot for as a doodle for late January, early February, to continue the discussion with this, and we'll keep you posted on the steps to, as Mike, because there's the next step to update the DES and move and work with the DDT on those first parts that we covered today. So.
All right, excellent. Well, we have 4 minutes left if you guys want 4 minutes back in your day. Just a reminder that the full fish monitoring work group meeting will be on January 20th from 2022, not 2021.
Oh, seriously. Yeah, suddenly we're turning the corner. Another year. I would also throw out, if you are sitting there thinking, gosh, I wish that so-and-so, my colleague, biologist in agency or tribe XYZ, really should be here today, maybe shoot their name to Meg, and we'll see. We'll gladly invite them. Anyone is welcome. But if you really feel like you know someone who would love to be part of these conversations or really has some answers that would help us, let us know and we'll invite them.
Otherwise, you guys can expect probably a follow-up email from me with additional information and just a link to the recording, so you can watch in case you kind of wanted to review one of the sections over again or wanted to pass it along.
The only other piece to add, Jen, is you've made a request, and I think it's good to pass the request on to the work group members. Is we are looking for innovative ideas and technologies to share and continue through the fish monitoring work group. So if you do feel that you have something from your agency or that would be good for the rest of the region to understand, and new innovation for monitoring or assessments or analysis tools, let us know, so maybe we can highlight it in one of the upcoming PNAMP fish monitoring work group meetings. So.
Excellent,
Good
Russ.
point.
Thanks for the plug. Yeah.
Well,
all right. Well, I think that's enough for us today. We appreciate you guys showing up and helping us kind of work through a lot of this stuff. And have a safe and wonderful holiday.